So, with our summary, our project looks at whether community based hazardous waste collection programs can work in Philippine coastal and island communities. These findings come from expert assessments, stakeholder analysis, barrier identification, and decision making using different evaluation methods. Six key problems were found that make waste collection difficult. First is the inadequate infrastructure and resources. Next is the policy and regulatory gaps. Third, we have the geographical challenges. Fourth, climate and disaster vulnerability. Fifth is the socioeconomic constraints. And lastly is the limited awareness and education. Next, we have different groups that play the key role. We have the government agencies, the industry representatives, community organizations and NGOs, and the researchers and scientists. Using decision making tools like HP, BWM, Topsys, and Viker, the best solutions were ranked based on cost, effectiveness, and ease of implementations. The solutions were the community collection points, better law enforcement, mobile waste collectors, reward system for waste disposal, and the stronger waste storage. Moving on to the description, our case study focuses on community based hazardous waste collection programs in coastal and island communities in the Philippines. Many of these communities struggle with waste management due to the geographical challenges, lack of infrastructure, and environmental risks such as typhoon and flooding. These areas often lack proper waste disposal systems, leading to illegal dumping, pollution, and health risks. Since government waste collection services are limited or non existent in remote locations, the study explores whether local communities can manage hazardous waste through self organized collection programs. Our goal is to find solutions that are practical, affordable, and sustainable for long term waste management in these communities.
So for our stakeholder mapping, it categorizes the key players based on their decision-making power in waste management. So at the highest level, we have LGUs and DNR where they set policies, regulate waste, and allocate funding. And private waste management companies and international environmental organizations like the UN and Greenpeace provide expertise, funding, and advocacy, giving them medium to high influence. For community members, barangay officials, NGOs, and local businesses, they are deemed to have medium influence. And using this influence, they implement programs and support sustainability efforts. And lastly, for the academic institutions, although they have lower decision making power, they still provide very crucial research that informs the policies. So, this mapping really helps us to identify the key stakeholders, their roles, and where the collaborations are needed, especially if we want effective waste management. For the group's inherent weight assessment, we had summarized the results from the best worst method, where also in the second progress report we added the final normalized weights, which we are just repeating here in the third progress report as you can see on the table. And as it applies, we can still see that from the ranks, the first barrier to be deemed as the most critical is the inadequate infrastructure. Next is the policy and regulatory gaps. Third is the geographical challenges. Fourth is the climate vulnerability. Fifth is socioeconomic constraints. And lastly is the limited awareness. For our interdependency analysis, as you can see in our influence matrix table, it is similar to the table we had on the second progress report. And as the analysis goes, the policy and regulatory gaps was still the most influential barrier that had the most effect on the other barriers. On the other hand, the limited awareness and education was the least influential.
Now, with structural modeling, this method
helps us visualize how different barriers to waste management are interrelated. The key takeaway here is that some issues act as root causes while others are consequences. At the very top of our structural model, we identified policy and regulatory gaps as the root cause of most waste management challenges. Weak regulations and poor enforcement lead to a domino effect, making it harder to develop infrastructure and enforce compliance. Directly connected to policy gaps is climate and disaster vulnerability. Extreme weather events like typhoons and flooding severely disrupt waste collection and disposal, especially in coastal areas. Without strong policies, communities remain vulnerable to these disruptions. From here, we see how other barriers emerge. Inadequate infrastructure and resources stem from weak policies, meaning that there are no proper waste disposal sites, limited collection systems, and poor transport facilities. This in turn makes it harder for communities to properly manage hazardous waste. Additionally, socioeconomic constraints play a role. Many communities lack financial support for sustainable waste programs. Geographical challenges further compound the issue, making transportation costly and inefficient, especially in remote islands. Finally, limited awareness and education ranks lowest in the model, suggesting that while public knowledge is important, it is not the primary driver of change. Policy and infrastructure must come first. The key insight from this model is that improving waste management starts with policy reforms, which will create a cascading positive impact on infrastructure, funding, and community engagement. Moving on to multi-criteria decision analysis or MCDA ranking, a method we use to rank the barriers based on their overall impact on hazardous waste management. The ranking is based on expert evaluations where each barrier was scored in terms of its weight and influence. The highest ranked issue is inadequate infrastructure and resources, with weight of 0.35. This means that poor facilities and lack of collection systems pose the biggest obstacle to effective waste management. Next is policy and regulatory gaps with a weight of 0.2. As we discussed earlier, weak governance leads to ineffective enforcement, which directly affects other aspects of waste management. Climate and disaster vulnerability ranks third with a weight of 0.15. This reflects how natural disasters disrupt even well structured waste management systems, making climate resilience a crucial factor in waste management planning. Following that, geographical challenges scored 0.12, indicating that while remote locations make waste transport difficult, it is not as critical as policy and infrastructure gaps. Socioeconomic constraints at 0.1 suggest that financial challenges impact waste programs, but with proper funding and incentives, they can be addressed. Lastly, limited awareness and education rank the lowest at 0.08. This supports our previous findings. While public awareness is valuable, it alone cannot drive systemic change unless structural improvements are made. From this analysis, we see that the most effective way to improve hazardous waste management is to invest in infrastructure and policy reforms, followed by climate adaptation strategies and logistical improvements. Finally, let's look at the CAP study, which examines how people understand and respond to hazardous waste issues. First is with knowledge. Most people understand that waste management is important, but they lack awareness of specific policies, climate risks, and infrastructure needs. Many communities don't realize the long term impact of improper disposal. Second, for attitude, generally there is strong support for better policies and infrastructure. However, some businesses and households view waste management as costly or inconvenient, which affects compliance. Third, for practices, while some local government units, LGUs, and NGOs have initiated waste programs, enforcement remains weak. Many businesses and households still lack proper disposal methods, leading to continued environmental risks. Lastly, for perception, the public sees policy gaps and poor infrastructure as the biggest challenges. While awareness campaigns help, most people believe that education alone won't solve the issue. Stronger policies and better facilities are needed. This study reinforces that we found in our structural model and MCDA ranking. Awareness alone is not enough. There must be policy driven solutions, infrastructure investments, and financial support to make hazardous waste management effective in coastal and island communities.
Lastly, for policy and practical recommendations. For policy recommendations, first up is to strengthen policy and regulatory frameworks. This includes establishing clear waste policies and stricter penalties. Next is to improve infrastructure and resource allocations. This means building waste collection sites and improving transport access. Third is to enhance climate resilience and waste management. A part of this could be like designing disaster proof waste storage facilities. Fourth is to encourage public private partnerships where we work with private companies for funding and expertise. And lastly is to develop education and awareness campaigns where we educate communities on proper waste and disposal. For practical recommendations, we recommend implementing community collection points wherein we set up small drop off sites for hazardous waste. We also recommend deploying mobile waste collection units wherein we use mobile collectors to reach the remote areas. Third is to enhance waste law enforcement at the barangay level, of course, where we train officials to enforce waste regulations. And for the fourth, we want to introduce an incentive based waste disposal system wherein we reward responsible waste disposal. And lastly, we want to strengthen community based management organization like supporting NGOs and cooperatives in waste programs.
So, moving on to the reliability of the LLM, we have clarity, which is a well defined prompt which leads to precise answers, while a vague one results in general responses. For example, instead of asking how to manage waste, we should ask what are the best practices for hazardous waste management in coastal regions. This makes sure that the response is more focused and useful. The second one, which is contextual framing, if we mention that we are discussing hazardous wastes in the Philippines, the AI tailors the answer to that specific situation, considering local challenges. An example is why is mentioning context important when asking about industry regulations. The third is iterative refinement. So if we ask, list five barriers to hazardous waste collection in remote areas versus explain why hazardous waste collection is difficult in remote communities. So the first one gives a structured list, while the second one provides a detailed explanation. We can refine the prompts until we get the desired response as well. The fourth one, which is structured outputs. So if we need information in a certain format, such as bullet points, tables, or reports, we should specify that. An example is instead of just asking for best practices, we can request them in a table comparing advantages and disadvantages. Uh, an example is how could structured responses improve report writing? And the last one, we have the prompt chain optimization. So rather than asking one long question, we can break it into parts. First, identifying problems, then assessing their impacts, and finally ranking their solutions. So, to the second part of the reliability of LLM, we have the ensuring LLM output reliability. So, for the first one, bias and accuracy. So, AI models learn from device datasets, so their responses may contain biases. For instance, an AI generated policy recommendation for Philippine waste management might not align with actual local laws unless we specify those laws in the prompt. An example is, can you think of a situation where an AI response didn't match reality? For the second one, we have external verification, which is to ensure accuracy, we must cross check AI responses with actual sources like government reports or academic studies. While AI provides structured insights, it doesn't replace real world validation. The third one, which is handling ambiguities. So sometimes AI can misinterpret technical terms, like if a response seems unclear, we should refine our question or ask for an explanation. An example is we can ask, why do policy gaps rank higher than climate risk in waste management? To clarify the AI reasoning behind it. The fourth one, which is consistency in multi step reasoning.
So when dealing with multi-step analysis like MCDA, AI might produce inconsistent answers. As they ensure logical progression between questions, it also helps maintain their accuracy. We can double check by summarizing AI responses and looking for contradictions in their statements, or also double cross or double check in other sources.